as I say, after 3 o'clock. But right now, an interesting story this morning, which with the headline "Witch Hunt," and it's in the Daily Mail, saying that, and it details how dozens of ex-soldiers, some of them now in their 70s actually, have received letters from the Ministry of Defence asking them about the deaths of 10 civilians in Northern Ireland more than 40 years ago. The incident in question happened in the Ballymurphy area of Belfast back in 1971, and the ex-soldiers are being asked to talk about their involvement in order to help with some new inquests that have been ordered 40-odd years on into those deaths. At least two of those written to are former paratroopers who were also at the centre of a police probe into the Bloody Sunday shootings in Londonderry the following year in 1972, and that could result in their prosecution for murder. Well, these new inquests into this other incident at Ballymurphy have been approved following requests by families of those who died. They requested the Attorney General of Northern Ireland to open new inquests, and he's granted that request. And some of those soldiers written to who served in Northern Ireland will say that every soldier who served there will now be looking over their shoulders and wondering whether or not they are the next in line to be called, worried that they'll be called to give evidence, to rake over these events and possibly face prosecution themselves. They see it as an unjustifiable witch hunt from which only the lawyers will really benefit. And I have to say, I have some sympathy with that argument. Is it fair? Is it reasonable to put people through all of this 40 years after the event? Won't it be well nigh impossible to establish evidence about something that happened that long ago? And what about the cost, for heaven's sake? The Savile inquiry into Bloody Sunday took 10 years to complete and cost £200 million. Well, I completely sympathise with the bereaved families. In their view, they've never ever seen justice, and I am truly sorry about that. I do wonder whether or not there's a case for what the Americans call a statute of limitations. In other words, you put a limit on how far you can go back to rake over events like this, not just in Northern Ireland, but in life generally. I wonder what your views are on that. Should we put a limit on the amount of time you can in which you can open up inquiries of this kind? It would apply, of course, to some of those people perhaps involved in those sex offences of recent months and years. Is it fair? Is it reasonable to ask people to answer for what they may or may not have done 30, 40 years ago? Is it practical? Is it sensible to mount inquiry when evidence is clearly so hard to come by? 0345 6060 973 is the number to ring, or text me at 84850. Well, a little bit earlier to start this conversation, I talked to the former Northern Ireland Secretary and Labour MP Peter Hain. I began by asking him for his reaction to the MOD's decision to contact these former soldiers.
But at one level, the justice system has to take its course. That's the way the rule of law works. On the other hand, I am extremely concerned at the persistent way Northern Ireland is now being pushed down a road of looking over its shoulder to a past which was terrible, of terror and violence and bombing and horror and atrocities committed on all sides, including, as we know from the Bloody Sunday verdict, which resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians at the hands of British soldiers, including by the army. But if you're going to continue doing this, whether it's Ballymurphy or whether it's issues arising from Bloody Sunday, then you've got to do it to everybody, even-handedly, including Republicans, and for that matter loyalists, but particularly Republicans who have all signed up to the peace process and which has now been operating since the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 very successfully.
And of course, some of those Republicans allegedly involved have received letters saying they're immune from prosecution.
Well, that's not quite true. The so-called on the runs, as it was called, concerned people who were Republicans, probably still Republicans, who asked whether there was any evidence against them in a procedure agreed by the British government under Tony Blair and operated by successive Secretaries of State, including myself. And where there was no evidence, then they were given a letter saying there's no grounds to proceed on any prosecution. But it didn't rule out evidence coming to light at a future date. And this is the situation that now arises for the Ballymurphy soldiers, where they are being invited to go to an inquest decades after the Troubles were over, when all that horror and evil and nightmare of the Northern Ireland terrorism has gone, And, I think the question for politicians in Northern Ireland, and it is in the end their responsibility, is to say, we've really got to look to the future rather than continuously over our shoulder to the past, because there are two very important reports in existence which have never really been implemented. One by Lord Eames, which I commissioned as Secretary of State in 2007, and they reported a few years later, Lord Eames and Dennis Bradley, and produced a very respected report, save for one flaw where they gave monetary compensation to victims, and that created a huge hullabaloo and drowned out serious attention given to their other proposals. And then there was the other report, more recently by Richard Haas, a respected American diplomat who made many of the similar recommendations. Now, it's down that road of addressing the past that and particularly giving some sense of closure to victims, that I think the priority should lie, rather than pursuing prosecutions on all sides, because that's what you'd have to do, reopening old wounds which have been, if not healed, then at least safely sewn up.
On the other hand, do you not see that the families of those who lost their lives in this and other incidents in Northern Ireland feel they haven't had justice and have never had justice, and they want justice to be seen to be done?
I totally sympathise with them. I've talked to many victims. There were, of course, 3,000 deaths in the Troubles and many, many more serious injuries, and almost no family in Northern Ireland was unaffected. It was that horrible. And I can well understand and sympathise with victims who feel they had no closure. They've often had no answers to what has happened to their loved ones who've just disappeared. Or in the case of those that have been killed on all sides, including at the hands of British security forces, they've had no explanation for what happened. So yes, I can sympathise with them. But the truth is, over 90% of those cases going back 40, 50 years ago are never going to be resolved in the courts and through the judicial system, because the evidence isn't there to do it. And that's the truth. You've got to find another way of addressing it.
So would you back a statute of limitations like they have in the United States, whereby there comes a point at which you no longer look into these things? And would you apply that not just to Northern Ireland, but to other cases as well here on the mainland?
That's a huge question. And it's a question which can't just be plucked out of the air, in a sense, and addressed. It's a fair question to put to me. I don't complain about that, John. But it's a very thorny issue to suddenly spring on Northern Ireland in isolation from this much more important imperative, in my view, at the priority being to address the past in a comprehensive way, to pick up those very authoritative, respected reports, two of which are lying on the shelf, that have been broadly welcomed across the political divides in Northern Ireland, between old enemies, and saying, yes, this is the road we need to travel down. But they've not had the willingness, the political determination to pick up the proposals and run with them. They said, yes, we agree with this in principle, but in practice they've done nothing about it. That's what they should do. If then in the context of that, the issue about a statute of limitations arises, well, let's look at it.
That was Peter Hain, former Northern Ireland Secretary and Labour MP. We're going to talk now to Seán Murray. Seán's a filmmaker who last year made Ballymurphy, a documentary about the Ballymurphy massacre, as it's called, in which 10 people died, and Seán's grandmother died in Ballymurphy in 1976, as I understand it, after watching her son get arrested. Let's talk to you about that first of all, Seán, the circumstances of your grandmother's death. Can you just elaborate on that a little for me?
Well, firstly, John, my grandmother was a friend of Mrs. Connolly, who was killed in Ballymurphy in 1971, and they were close friends. So it was 5 years later, my own grandmother had witnessed her son being beaten by the British Army and taken from the house. She tried to stop him, and she suffered a heart attack herself and died.
I understand. I'm sorry to hear that. Now, let's get on to the point of the story today, which is this letter from the Ministry of Defence asking soldiers who were at Ballymurphy at the time to help with evidence in forthcoming inquests into the deaths of those who died. Do you think that's justified?
I do indeed, yes. I don't think that anyone, whether you're a soldier or a member of the security service, should be above the law.
And do you think they will be, even 40 years on, that's an exercise they should be put through, given some of these guys are now in their 70s, Seán?
Well, I think we'll have to look at it in the greater context of things. I mean, Republicans, in general, the IRA, were pursued vigorously by the law for their actions during the conflict. And this was not met with the same force against members of security forces or the police as regards to civilian killings during the conflict. So there is a sense of injustice still, and it permeates the political landscape here in the north of Ireland. And there's this sense we will never move forward unless we deal with the past.
But I mean, for one thing, isn't the evidence going to be devilishly difficult to come by? And what about the length of time it would take, and what about the cost involved?
Well, I don't think that's for me or you, John, to say whether the evidence is there or not. The families feel there is. The families' lawyers feel that there is. And if there is evidence that the soldiers worked, not within a legal framework, and that murder was committed, we feel that, myself personally, as I've suffered, my own family has suffered through state violence, feel that soldiers should be pursued, whether it's 40, 50 years later.
But just to pick up the point made by Peter Hain, if we are saying to people on the Republican side, against whom there is no evidence, you've got a letter here saying you won't be prosecuted, shouldn't we be saying the same to the soldiers who are now being written to by the Ministry of Defence? I mean, it does not seem even-handed on the face of it.
Well, you see, you're complicating things a bit, John, because the families are primarily they're looking for the truth. That's primarily what they're looking for. So justice and the truth are two separate things. I personally, if a member of my family was killed by the security services, it was 40 years later, I wouldn't personally want anyone to go to jail. But I would like to know the truth. I would like to know who murdered my family member, and I would like to be stated as all those people who were killed in Ballymurphy, that they weren't civilians. The media were also complicit in saying that they were members of the IRA. They were innocent people, and still to this day, the media propagated that these people were IRA men and gun women, which is completely untrue.
Seán, it's a fascinating subject. Thanks very much, Dee, for your time talking to us, and Happy New Year to you. So there we have it. I'd like to broaden this out a bit, not just talk about the situation in Northern Ireland, but talk about the situation generally. Is there a case, in your view, for what the American prosecute on the grounds that it would probably be very difficult to get a satisfactory conclusion? I've got lots of calls. I'll get through as many of them as I possibly can in the time allocated. Let's go to Dan, first of all, in northwest London. Hi, Dan.
Hi there. Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Why do you pick up the phone today?
Well, I'm interested in the discussion you're having around the statute of limitations like they have in America. And I guess the point I wanted to make is two things. Just to think about, the Hillsborough disaster and the Stephen Lawrence case.
Yeah.
Now, if there's a statute of limitations, both of those cases would have disappeared. And in both cases, the families were vilified. So I think if we were to have the same thing here in the UK, there could be many discourages of justice.
I hear what you say, but it depends on two things. It depends on at what point you pitch the statute of limitations, how many years ago you say is the cut-off point. But secondly, I would also say with regard to Hillsborough and in regard to Stephen Lawrence as well, if the initial inquiries had done their job properly, then justice would have been done there and then. But I hear what you say.
I mean, that's true. Justice would have been done. I mean, the Hillsborough disaster, there was a huge cover-up, as we now know. And in other cases in the future where the investigation is not conducted properly or witnesses don't come forward and choose not to come forward for whatever their reasons, and then later on evidence becomes apparent that there is a suitable case for a retrial. And I think if we did have statute of limitations here, then clearly certainly those families wouldn't have been vilified in the way they were.
Dan, thanks for your call. Happy New Year to you. Let's go to John in Crayford. Hi, John.
Hello, John. Yeah, what I was going to say is there's a lot. I mean, I just heard what the other chap said about statute of limitation and the Hillsborough case, Steve Lawrence, but there's also the Mark Duggan, which there's quite a lot of gaping holes in that. But what I want to talk about is the cycle of blame and violence. And you're never going to get closure until you actually address what the root cause was. And it goes back, I think, 150 years ago when we had the famine, when you had the exploitation of one community by another highly privileged community, which kind of carries on from what you previously said.
I don't disagree with you, John, but we can't have an inquiry that looks into things that happened 150 years ago, can we?
Well, I know. Why not? I mean, I think you can look at the root cause of every problem And once you identify the root cause of any problem, whether it's 6 months ago or 200 years ago, I think you're going to get some closure, because you're going to never get closure unless you look at the root cause of these problems.
So you're saying, yes, go ahead and pursue these sort of, pursue is the wrong word, that these soldiers are being invited to give evidence at inquests, and that may lead to prosecutions in some cases. And you think that's fair, that's reasonable?
That depends on what justice means at the end of the day. If justice means identifying wrongdoing, irrespective of when it happened, then that's justice at the end of the day. If it was the other way round, if soldiers were killed, I would still say get justice, because that's what we're all about. That's what democracy, freedom is based on. If you don't, if you don't pursue justice, you're not going to have a fair system at any point.
Okay.
And you've got to look at the root cause of everything.
Okay, John, thanks for your call. Jim's in High Wycombe. Hi, Jim.
Hello there, John. How are you doing, all right?
I'm fine, thank you. Happy New Year to you. What are you going to say?
Happy New Year to you. Right, my suggestion is just do what the politicians in Ireland have been saying for a long time, and just bring out a truth commission where there will be no prosecution, so people can come forward and say, yeah, I'm Joe Bloggs, I shot dead, what's his name, Joe Soap there, blah, 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 I done this. And then it all come out like they did in South Africa, and it works perfectly well over there, and there's no prosecutions. And we're all fine. As long as people get the truth and know everything, that's all they want, really.
It's an interesting idea, and do you think that would, I mean, given the complexities of Northern Ireland, and I'm no expert, I've been there, I went there quite a lot in the 70s as a reporter for the BBC, but I'm no expert, but do you think that would draw a line under the issues in a country like that, where the issues are so complex and so...
Well, I think it would, and I'll tell you the reason why. I mean, I've got a lot of family in Ireland, like all sorts of places. North, south, I have them in Derry, Belfast, Cork, Dublin, you name it. And I talked to a lot of people over the years, and a lot of them have said if only they knew the whole truth, what exactly happened, there would be a lot of them would be happy. I'm talking about people that have had people that were killed.
Okay, in the absence of a truth commission, what about this? About the notion of soldiers being asked to give evidence about things that happened 40 years ago? Is it fair on them? Is it worthwhile?
Well, if it establishes what went on the actual day of what happened, that would be a good idea. But I suppose, like after 40 odd years, do you really want to prosecute men in their 70s? Is it worth it? I don't know really.
Yeah, I mean, if you were, of course, if you were the family of someone who'd lost their lives, you'd maybe have a different view.
Well, that's possible, yeah. But I think that the Truth Commission is the way forward. Anyway, at least people then know, what happened.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. Have a good New Year. Norman joins me from Rickmansworth. Hi, Norman.
Hi. If we go back to the Second World War, we have a cenotaph, we have all these various things saying that the soldiers were wonderful, but they actually did commit rape, they did commit murder, they did many of the things that go on in war. Some did. Mm-hmm. Some did, but there's been no repercussions to it. We pretend it never happened. It's never mentioned. There's no books on the subject. There's been no prosecutions. The same is true of Germans, French, Russians, who raped and murdered during the war, in some cases in millions. 100 million people, I think, died in the Second World War. It's all been forgiven and forgotten, and all these people go to work and live a civilized life and are respected members of our community.
Yeah, and you're saying standards have now changed. Is that your point?
Well, our standards have changed. Just a lot of the topics we talk about, when we talk about hindsight, we were talking about the Broadwater Farms thing, things have changed, ideas have changed, but war is nasty, and we seem to think we can fight a war in a sanitized way, and it just isn't true. And we're pretending that we can clean up the past, and that also isn't true. There's no desire, and there can't be, because people did horrible things in the war.
Norman, thanks very much.
Still do.
Norman, thanks very much indeed for your call. Omar joins me from Camberwell. Hi, Omar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Stapleton. I was saying to one of your researchers that the statute of limitations doesn't apply to Nazi war criminals who are being pursued by Jews for alleged crimes committed in the Second World War. So why should it apply to anybody else?
Fair point. Fair point.
The fact of the matter also is that the people who devise the statute of limitations, they themselves are trying to evade and escape justice. But nobody.
How do you work that one out? Sorry.
Pardon me?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case, is it? I mean, when you say the people who devise the statute of limitation are trying to escape justice, who are you referring to?
Well, you only have to look into documentative evidence to substantiate what it is I'm saying. I mean, it's a bit of a history lesson there, but I can assure you that this is the case. The people who devise these mechanisms, they themselves have a lot to hide.
I'm not sure I buy that, but go on.
Okay.
Make your point.
What I would like to say, more importantly, Mr. Stapleton, is this. I noticed that in your discussions, God is never mentioned. And I'm a Muslim, I'm a practicing Muslim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran quite clearly that every individual should be held accountable for their own actions in this world. A lot of people who have committed a lot of crimes are deemed to have escaped justice.
Yep.
That is not the case at all.
All right,
everyone
thanks.
has to face Allah, and everyone will be given punishment according to the actions that they have perpetrated in this life.
Thank you very much, Omar. I'm only subbing because I want to get in one more call. That's Max, who's been waiting a long time, and he's in Dartford. Hi, Max.
Hello, just wanted to say that this investigation or inquiry should be in place as long as the last party or the last person who is related to the particular event or incident is alive and can answer or give evidence.
Yeah,
that's my view.
That's a point.
Simple, yeah.
A fair point. You want people who are still alive around to say what happened. Well, it's a valid point. And if not, you think there's not a case for actually investigating crimes that happened 40, 50 years ago?
It doesn't matter how long. I would say, 120 years, just to make sure that the last possible person that is alive can answer, then the person should be brought to the justice or to give evidence.
Okay, Max, thanks very much indeed for your call. Happy New Year to you. Thanks very much indeed to all my callers and all those who text or tweeted. Got quite a response to that one. Thank you very much indeed to each and every one of you. Coming up after 3 o'clock.